Section 28 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers, by James McCosh. Book 3rd, The Comparative Powers, General Remarks on the Comparative Powers. 1. These faculties are in all men, not merely in certain individuals, times, or nations, but the properties of humanity. They are found in a rudimentary condition in children and in idiots, in the former to be developed. Madmen often display them in an intense form. 2. They constitute the highest of the intellectual powers. I may show that the moral are higher. They carry us out the farthest, and they raise us up the highest. They enable us to connect all things we know with one another, and they take us as far out as the connections reach. Thus, causation takes us as far back as the millions of geographical ages, and as far forward as the causes now in operation go. Show us, for instance, that this world is to be burned with fire. 3. In their exercise, they have risen very much above the senses, and the need of the cooperation of the senses, and of the bodily frame generally. True, they have been dependent on these for the material on which they have to pronounce a judgment, but the judgments themselves are purely mental. Hence we often find that in old age, when the senses, the memory, and the informing faculties are breaking down, the judgment is as sound as ever, and fails only when a proper statement of facts is not given it. 4. They have all a tendency to operate and seek out for the appropriate objects, allured by the numerous relations which may be discovered in them. Thus we have pleasure in finding an essential sameness in the midst of minor diversities. We love to visit a locality with which we were familiar in former days, and to trace the identity in the hills and valleys, so changed in the houses upon them, and the people dwelling in them. We are interested in the lights and shadows of the landscapes, and the varying aspects of the sea and sky. We set ourselves keenly to detect an old friend whom age has changed. We analyze the bodies in nature, and seek to solve the difficult problems in science and philosophy. We love to resolve a complex whole into its component parts, and to understand thereby the whole of which they form a part. And we feel as if we know a thing only when we are acquainted with its constituents. We delight to trace the likenesses among objects, and to discover the analogies between things often far removed from each other, and which bind in a unity all parts of nature and of history. We find it pleasant, as well as profitable, to observe how plants and animals are after a type, how the heavenly bodies move in like curves, elliptical or spiral, and how occurrences, historical and cosmic, move on in epochs. The idea was anticipated by Pythagoras, and has been established in modern times, that physical laws such as gravity and chemical affinity take a quantitative expression. We like to see activity in the breeze, in the running stream, in the leaping cataract, in the rippled ocean, in the perpetual motion and prattle of boys and girls, in the contests of wit, and in the Demosthenic torrent of eloquence. All lofty minds delight to follow effect to cause, and cause to prior cause, and on to the great originating cause, from whom all things proceed. 5. Our comparative faculties are admirably suited to the state of things in which we are placed. I can conceive of a world in which there is no such adaptation, in which the relations which we are inclined to notice have no correspondences in what falls under our eyes. There might thus have been an inscription without the means of deciphering it, or a writing without an interpretation. But we find instead that we live in a world in which there is a beautiful harmony between the eye that looks and the forms and colors which it gazes on. We feel security in falling back with the Eleatics from the phenomenal variations revealed by the senses upon the permanent to-on, revealed to the intellect as a noumenon, and having a correspondence in the permanent mind, and the conservation of energy in matter. Our analytical propensity is rewarded in discovering that complexities can be resolved into their elements. Our inclination to generalize is encouraged by finding that organic objects can be arranged into species, orders, and kingdoms. We rejoice when, in accordance with our anticipations, we find all nature conform to laws of time, figure, and proportion. We are moved by the movements of nature in heaven above, and the earth beneath, in the rapidity of molecules, and the quickness of thought. We pursue eagerly one act to a previous one, and are stayed only when we rest on one unchangeable substance. The consequence of all this is, that instead of being strangers, wanderers, or outcasts in the world in which we are placed, we are, as it were, among friends, with a friend who is the bond of union among them all. 6. There is a correspondence between the subjective and objective worlds, between the thinking mind and the objects it is called to think on. This does not arise, as the ancient Eleatics and modern pantheists maintain, from the unity of thought and being, for we have as clear proof of the difference of mind and matter as we have of their connection. Nor can it spring solely or even mainly from the two having acted on each other for indefinite ages and become adjusted, as Herbert Spencer accounts for their relation. No doubt their connection may have influenced both. Thus, the contemplation of the action of matter by mind may have created tendencies in the mind, but to produce this fruit, there must have been an original marriage union. In another department of nature, we are prepared to acknowledge that the rays of light have not produced the eye, nor the eye the rays of light, though they have so far brought each other into conformity. So neither does the subjective mind create objective matter, nor objective matter create the properties of mind. We are thus driven to the conclusion that there must have been a foreordained conformity between them. We have thus the true doctrine of pre-established harmony between mind and body, of which Leibniz had, after all, only imperfect glimpses. Not a harmony of the two acting apart, but of the one acting upon and with the other. 7. We have seen that there is an intimate connection between our associations and the discovery of relations, and have illustrated this by resemblance and contrast. But the remark holds true of all relations. For every relation discovered, there is a ground, and this may become the bond of an association, which strengthens and enlarges that of contiguity. 1. On seeing a man in one dress today, we think of him in the other dress in which we saw him yesterday, the man himself being the same in both. 2. On the leg of a table being seen by us, the idea of the whole table is apt to come up. 3. We have already discussed resemblance. 4. Certain relations of triangles suggest other relations to the mathematician, also of triangles. Stratford and Shakespeare suggest each other, because of the birth there of the great poet. 5. The year 1790 is apt to bring up both the French and American revolutions, in both there being revolution about the same time. 6. The proportions of one figure recall those of another. 7. The activity of some one thing, such as life, calls up the activity of other things, such as the wind. 8. The view we have given of physical causation, that it consists of two or more agents in the cause, to be found in a charged state in the effect, enables us to see how the common qualities in the one should call up the other. In all cases, the powers in the substance acting in the effect suggest the powers acting in the cause. It may be with their adjuncts, and vice versa. Associations in all cases imply a contiguity, but in the highest forms, correlative associations are strengthened and enlarged by the discovery of relations. I may add that a man's intellectual wealth is large in proportion to the formed coins and cut diamonds which he has laid up in correlations. Without many and varied connections, there can be no readiness or comprehensiveness of memory, such as is to be found in our greater men. With such accumulated riches, a man is ready to expend bounty of thought wherever he goes. 8. The comparative faculties differ widely in the case of different individuals. This may arise from the intensity of the original cognition, or the strength of the comparative faculty, from one or from both. In some cases, it looks as if it were the original impression, say of form or color or incident, which is so keen that it penetrates into us. In other cases, it looks as if it were a strong intellectual energy seeking for relations. It is evident that there are native tastes and talents. The two commonly go together, the taste calling the talent into exercise, and the talent forming and evoking the taste, and both seeking out fitting objects. When these are very marked, they commonly determine the decision of the youth as to his pursuits, his vocation, his business, his profession, his literary or scientific studies. It is true that circumstances often have a swaying influence, in fact, compel a settlement. But in most youths of any force of character, there is a natural ability or inclination which selects his life for him, and this frequently not in concurrence with outward position, but in opposition to it. If a man, for instance, has a taste for some particular pursuit, he will be found pursuing it in his vacant hours when obliged to engage habitually in far different work. How often is the merchant or lawyer longing for a leisure day or week to enable him to examine the forms of plants, and rushing forth whenever the pressure of business allows into the midst of the beauties of nature? How often does a minister of religion, busy for most of the week in caring for his flock, find an idle day or evening in which to pursue philosophic speculation? It is thus clear that one man may have a strong tendency to observe one kind of relation, and another a different kind. It is always to be remembered, however, that the same natural talent may be exercised on different objects, and it is here that external circumstances may have a modifying influence. It may be mere accident which determines a man with a certain taste to betake himself to the study of plants or animals, or to painting or sculpture. It is also to be borne in mind that some pursuits require the exercise of more than one faculty, and it is only when there is the necessary combination that the qualification for the particular work is secured. But making the needful allowances, it will be found that, while in a few there is a universal ability, and in the great body of mankind there is a moderate degree of various talents, in some there are peculiar gifts which will and ought to find congenial pursuits, and thus determine their destiny. It is a most happy thing when a youth comes to know what are his peculiar qualifications, and is enabled to put them to proper use. It is a blessed thing when a man with marked endowments is led to consecrate them to a high end. 9. All the relations enumerated, with one exception, are to be found in mental as well as in material objects. That one is the relation of space. We cannot correlate by it our ideas and emotions. We arrange bodies according to type, but we cannot thus distribute or even conceive of our mental states. The reason is obvious. Consciousness as a faculty of intuitive cognition does not make known to us our mental states as occupying space, and as extension does not appear in the primitive knowledge, so it does not reappear in the discovery of relations. This might be urged as an argument of some force in favor of the immateriality of the soul. We cannot conceive mental, as we do physical facts, under spatial relations. 10. I need not dwell at the close on the means of training the powers, for I have been illustrating them throughout. It is enough to exhort every young man to let none of these intellectual faculties lie dormant, or yield to the temptation to satisfy himself with sensations, feelings, and passions. End of section 28.